Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. This time we have a special interview with Bierman from Ukraine Focus. That's a group that helps out Ukraine and volunteers, is reliant on your donations. Link is going to be afterwards in the show notes. But first, I'd like to mention that they have a really cool project that I was contacted and told about. It concerns Zelensky's truck from a show, but we'll get to that a bit later. Well, nice to have you on the show, Brock.
Yes, good afternoon, or hello to all your listeners.
Please do explain us a bit about Ukraine Focus. Who are you, and what do you do so far? I've read a bunch of good things about you guys, but I think I should allow you to explain it.
Yeah, that's fine. But let me back up a little bit and explain a little bit about myself
Sure.
and how I ended up getting to where we are right now. I have been involved with development in Eastern Europe for the better part of 25 years. In fact, my ancestry comes from a small city in northern Moldova called Soroka. And I also have ancestry from Odessa.
Oh, I love Odessa. I love Odessa so much. It's my favorite Ukrainian city.
Yeah, they came to America in the late 19th and early 20th century. And my grandfather, his name was Samuel Robert Bierman. In fact, a lot of what I'm doing today is really, in retrospect, as I think about it, as a result of me studying him, right? So my grandfather, rather, came to the United States in 1906, became a citizen in 1913, ended up joining the U.S. Army in 1918, going back to France as a doughboy. I studied a lot about his history when I was very young, and I was very interested in Eastern European history. And my grandfather served as an elected office. He also was very involved in his community in where he was from, and that really generated a lot of interest for me in not only my community, but serving. I served in the House of Representatives in Rhode Island for 3 terms. And then in 2002, I ended up taking a position with President Bush at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And that's because in 1999, I was asked to go to Ukraine as part of an exchange program with elected officials with the International Republican Institute. And I spent a little over a month in Ukraine talking about what it means to live in democracy. So my first trip to Ukraine actually involved a huge amount of travel in a very short period of time. And we started in Kyiv, and we went to a bunch of different places, Zhytomyr, Jakatsy, Chernihiv, and ended up in Odessa. And during that time there, that's when I really fell in love with trying to help countries like Ukraine, places like Moldova, and other countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I was fortunate enough to be chosen by President Bush's team to come on board and work at USAID as the Chief of Staff for the Europe and Eurasia Bureau, where I spent 6 years in that area and traveled to Ukraine quite a bit. In the course of the last 25 years since my first trip, I also took a position for President Trump, worked for him for 3 years. I was appointed by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate to my position as the Assistant Administrator at USAID, where I spent 3 years working on a number of projects, specifically countering malign Kremlin influence, working on young political leaders. And that's really what I've been doing in the course of the last 25 years. Between administrations, I worked as a consultant, but I've always been in some way involved with Eastern European development. And Ukraine and Moldova have been really not just an interest, but a passion. So I actually, after having left, and I'm truncating a lot of this, after I left the last administration in 2021, I was actually part of the board of a small organization called the European Democracy Youth Network, and I found myself in Bratislava during the war, when the war was actually the day the war started.
Oh, you were in Bratislava then?
Bratislava when the war started, and I was really supposed to go to Moldova, and my plane was canceled because obviously the president had closed the airport, my Sandu, and my entire trip got canceled. And I was supposed to go there for development reasons, but what happened was when the war started and I found myself stuck there, I started making some calls. And by April, I had arranged to go across the border, actually walked across the border and did an assessment. And I reached out to some friends of mine who I'd known. They took me around Eastern Europe, or I'm sorry, Western Ukraine in Eastern Europe. And we started talking to a lot of different people, a lot of volunteers, a lot of doctors, a lot of local members of the city council or mayors. We went to different shelters, and we just did a real quick and fast assessment of what their needs were. And of course, at that point in the war, Ukraine needed everything, right? One thing that I heard continually is that they needed ambulance. There were ambulances. There was a shortage on ambulances before the war started, and there was an ambulance shortage in in all of Europe for that matter. But the one thing that I'd heard consistently was we need more ambulances. So after returning back from that assessment, I contacted a few friends of mine, and we raised enough money to buy 3 ambulances, and we delivered them to Odessa and Mykolaiv. I actually was working with a friend of mine. His name is George Tuka. I don't know if you've heard of George. George was the former governor of Luhansk, and also the deputy minister of internally displaced people under President Poroshenko. But I met George through Rotary International, and the next thing you know, I'm finding myself in Mykolaiv delivering ambulances under shelling. And but what was really telling is the actual in-person assessment of what was going on. And what I saw was a doctor show me the car that he was using to transport soldiers to back and forth from the hospital to like the first line, because that's as far as they could go with cars at the time. And basically he was using a 4-door old model sedan to transport patients. And it was just, he opened up the back door, and it was shocking just to see the conditions of this car. But we delivered those 2 ambulances to this unit, and I went back to the United States after that, and I just said, we've got to do more. And I met some folks who contributed $100,000. We bought 10 more ambulances. Then I met another group that gave me another 100,000, and we gave another 10 ambulances. And before you know it, if you will, 3.5 years go by. We formed a charity called Ukraine Focus. We developed a program called the Volunteer Ambulance Corps, which is made up of volunteers from not only the United States, but all over the world, including Australia. We've had volunteers from all over Europe, all over the United States, and they come and they drive the ambulances from Europe to, or sometimes the United States. We've had some shipped over. And we drive them right to Kyiv. And in some cases, in the beginning of the war, we were driving them right into the front lines. I mean, literally, we were in Bakhmut when the offensive started, and they had to evacuate us. But we have delivered, in the course of the last 3.5 years, over 400 ambulances. And, I just want to say that, going back to my grandfather, as mentioned earlier, they had a program. The United States provided ambulances to France during the First World War, and it was under the American Field Service. So we modeled that program. And, Ernest Hemingway was a driver of an ambulance during the First World War. And we've had some really interesting drivers participate with our programs. We've had an astronaut. We've had a reality TV show person. We've had politicians. We've had everyday ordinary citizens from all over the United States and Europe. But at the end of the day, we've had hundreds of volunteers help us deliver these ambulances to Ukraine. And from what I understand from the doctors in Ukraine, every ambulance saves about 250 lives a month. And the ambulances are lasting anywhere between 60 and 90 days. That's what I'm being told. And, we were doing the best we can to deliver as many ambulances as we possibly can deliver.
Yeah, please expand a bit on that, because about how long the ambulances last, because I've delivered regular cars to Ukraine, and a lot of people don't seem to understand how they're an expendable resource there. All sorts of cars, because they get exploded very quickly.
Well, so first off, the Russians are stealing them if they can. If they can't steal them, they destroy them. And so they're being targeted. And of course, on top of that, you have the road conditions, which will take a toll on any kind of vehicle. And so they just don't last that long. And so if you incorporate the lack of ambulances and the need for them, they could use 1,000 ambulances yesterday, and they still won't have enough, according to some of the leadership that I have talked to in Ukraine. And
yeah,
listen, there's something really important that I would like to talk to you about, because I think it's important that people understand that we're just not delivering these ambulances willy-nilly, right? We have a strategy behind what we're doing. When I first went to Ukraine, I worked with a friend of mine, like I said earlier, George Tuka, and he had identified a unit that needed them. But what I said to George was, George, I mean, there's never going to be enough resource to meet the needs here in Ukraine. There's never going to be enough ambulances to provide to you, given the amount of resource that I have access to. So how do we deliver them to which units, and how do we know which units need them? And so George introduced me to the commander of the Territorial Defense Force. I don't know if you're familiar with the TDF, are you?
That's the in Latvia we have something called like it used to be a paramilitary thing. It wasn't exactly like the main army units. Those are the guys who are just basically kind of like militias, as far as I understand that one.
So the TDF was stood up officially when the war began, and basically it was Zelensky. And if you probably recall this, at the very outset of the war, he was putting Kalashnikovs in the hands of citizens in an effort to protect
Yep.
protect Kyiv, and they were the second line behind the professional army. And if they had broken through the professional army, all that was left in Ukraine was this informal community service of people, men, women, young and old, who for most part never held a weapon before, never mind serve in the military. And a lot of these folks were young people that I had dealt with while I was at USAID, and I can remember so many stories about how they were given this Kalashnikov, AK-47 with 120 rounds, and said, told, look, here's where you need to be. This is what you need to do. Don't practice, because all you're going to get is 120 rounds, and be prepared to just point and shoot. And I can't even imagine what that would be like, to have to be told to do that under the circumstances that they dealt with. These are true patriots, very much like American patriots during the Revolutionary War, if you will. But at the end of the day, this group of citizens that came forward joined the Territorial Defense Force, and that TDF is made up of men and women from communities all around Ukraine. And at first, obviously they were driven by the community to protect their communities, but since the last 3.5 years, they've served on the front lines, and they are serving in the same ways professional soldiers are, and they've been giving their lives to protect the freedom and liberty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. But at the end of the day, they are just average, everyday Ukrainians who, like I said earlier, have never served as a professional military, or ever, and to some degree, never held a weapon before. In our last mission that we delivered, just to give you an example, we delivered 2 ambulances east of Dnipro and to this place, without getting into the details. And the 4 people that were there to accept them, one was a kindergarten teacher, one was like a stock analyst, the other one was a police analyst, and the other one was a trolley driver. All of them had virtually no training or had ever held a weapon before, and never envisioned themselves being in the position they were, but yet here they are working on the front lines to protect their homeland and save their fellow comrades in the trenches in Ukraine. And so we feel it's really important to work with the TDF, and we've been working exclusively with the TDF. And I've met, in fact, I just had a meeting with the commanding general in the last meeting, and I've been meeting with them to discuss the strategy of deployment of our ambulances. Ukraine Focus does not decide where the ambulances go. We allow the Ukrainians to do that, the TDF to do that, because we should not be in a position to make either military or civilian decisions when it comes to the asset allocation. And to get back to what I was saying earlier, what's important is that the ambulance goes to the place it's needed most. And so we think that the TDF is in the best position to do that. And we've been working from the top down on that, but we also work from the bottom up, because I get requests all the time from units because they need ambulances. And so we work out, we make sure that we work with the headquarters to get the ambulances to where they're needed. And we make sure that we are listening to the local units to make sure that they're getting there. So we've got a pretty good strategy when it comes to dissemination of our assets. I wish we had more. We've done as much as we possibly can. We use as much volunteer service as we can. We've got another mission coming up in October, where we'll deliver at least 20 more ambulances. And we've been very fortunate to get a lot of support. In fact, just recently, former President Poroshenko donated some money for us to buy trucks, which, by the way, are very limited in Ukraine. What people don't understand is trucks in America versus trucks in Europe in general It's a different culture. It's a different mindset.
Yeah, we don't have them here that much.
Exactly. Nobody uses trucks in Europe to some degree, and so getting trucks in Europe, not just in Ukraine, is extremely difficult. So we've been looking all over Europe. We try to buy them very inexpensively, and we deliver them as much as we possibly can. And when they're all used, by the way, I should just mention that they're all used. Nothing's new, because frankly, we couldn't afford to buy new ones, and we can buy, sometimes in 5 or 10 at the same price we'd pay for a new one. I know that's a lot very quickly, but
No, it's important. It's really important because again, the situation with the trucks is very serious. Because, like you said, we have a quite different culture regarding all these cars. Ukraine is a bit different because it's a very large country, so they must have had more on hand at the beginning. However, well, that's not the thing all over the place. The question is, where do you get those trucks?
right.
What is your main source then?
So we have a central location where we build it or bring together all of the trucks, the ambulances, the SUVs to bring to Ukraine. And
Hmm.
we have a network of individuals. And I have one person specifically who basically is who kind of searches for these vehicles, and he searches all over. We bought our ambulances. We bought a bunch from Madrid because they were renewing their fleet. So we got a great deal on 30 plus ambulances from Madrid. We bought some from various towns and medical facilities in France that were renewing their ambulances. We bought them from Germany. We bought them from UK. We bought them from Poland. I mean, honestly, we bought them from almost every country in Europe. And what we basically do is we look for good used ambulances at a cheap price, and we have a budget of normally it costs us about $10,000 for every ambulance that we deliver to Ukraine, and that's delivered. And we try to give them really good machines. And so far, we've had a lot of luck getting good machines at a fair price. And we tell people what we're doing. So, when we buy the ambulances, we're saying, hey, listen, we would appreciate your help because we're taking these to Ukraine. They're helping people, obviously saving lives. And we do the best we can to buy as many as we can for the cheapest amount in the best condition.
Okay, and how many people are there working in your group?
So I have, I have 3 people in Ukraine and a couple part-timers in Ukraine, and then I have one person who's working for me in Europe, and then I have some, volunteer people here in the United States. I mean, we're just really a volunteer organization.
Hmm.
About 90% of our resources go to programming, the delivery and the purchase and of the program itself, and other programs that we have, because it's not the only program. We also have a prosthetics program, and we have a Playgrounds for Peace program, which people can see on our internet website.
Yeah, which you'll link in the show notes, obviously, because
Yeah.
that's important.
Yeah, because I mean, look, we also raise money from our volunteering meals program. So the extra money we put into our prosthetics program. We've had a donor who gave us some 3D printers, and we were printing prosthetics with a 3D printer in 2 different locations in Kyiv or outside of Kyiv. And so we were trying to change the whole dissemination of prosthetics and make it easier, cheaper, and faster for people to get them, because obviously you and I both know there are over 100,000 new amputees in Ukraine since the beginning of the war, and that is a generational problem, a healthcare crisis, which is going to need to be addressed, and we've been trying to address it with this new technology. And we also have a Playgrounds for Peace program, which, by the way, as you also know, there was a mass migration of people from eastern Ukraine to western Ukraine, and in some cases, some places grew as much as 20%. And these new community members living in residence in western Ukraine, they needed a way to integrate into their new communities. And so we came up with this program called Playgrounds for Peace, where we provide a playground where the local IDPs and the current residents come together to build a playground, and then our hope is that the families integrate and the kids play together, and that they will have a better social cohesion within their communities by, one, building the playground together, and 2, having their children interact.
So, what's your latest new project then? Because it seems like you're doing a great job.
Hey everyone! Annette here. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Eastern Border. This show is possible thanks to your support. So if you like what you hear, head over to patreon.com/The Eastern Border and help us keep it going. Even small contributions make a difference. And don't forget, there's also a Discord. If you want to join the community, chat with Kristaps, share memes, or just learn more about history, come hang out. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thanks again, and now, back to the episode.
The Zelensky truck thing, because I was surprised about that.
Right, the Zelensky truck. So, well, yeah, that's been a long project in motion. I'd say about 2 years ago, I was approached by a friend of mine who said, "Hey, I have Zelensky's truck." I'm like, "What do you mean you have Zelensky's
What?
truck?" And I'm like,
That is confusing, yes.
exactly, right? So I said, "What does that mean?" And he basically said that President Zelensky auctioned off his truck
Mhm.
when the war started. I guess that he drove a red Chevrolet 1500 in his program, Servant of the People, and he pulled it out of their, their stock or their archives or wherever they keep their stuff from the show, and he auctioned it off. And the truck was painted, camo green and outfitted with various types of equipment, and it was bought by somebody and sent to the front lines. Well, it went to the front lines. It got all shot up. The motor was destroyed. Lots of bullet holes. The transmission was completely destroyed. So he sold it to me. Actually, I made a donation to his unit, and they gave it to me. And then we took it and we had it, fixed as much as we possibly could in Ukraine. The motor, I mean, it took us basically the better part of almost a year to get it fixed because it was so destroyed. And then we exported it, which took us a huge amount of time because of all of the export. Getting a truck into Ukraine is a lot easier than getting a truck out. But then we brought it back to the United States, where right now it's being fixed further so that it can be roadworthy, if you will. And then what we're going to use the proceeds from that truck to buy more ambulances.
And you're auctioning it off to the United States people. Right
Yeah,
now.
well, I'm not sure if we're going to auction it off or we're just going to take a donation. We haven't really kind of figured out what that looks like. We've got to follow U.S. laws. But the bottom line is whatever we can. I mean, it's cost us a certain amount of money to get it here and fix it. But the proceeds, regardless, will all go to buy ambulances for Ukraine.
Well, that's excellent. But the question is that well, how do people can verify this truck then? I saw you have information on the page, but I think this is important. And I think many people will be very interested in this because, yeah, getting your hands on a random Zelensky truck is something that I didn't really expect anyone could do, which is why you guys got me really interested about this whole conversation.
Yeah. Getting it out of Ukraine was really very difficult. I mean, we had to, obviously, we had to follow all of the rules, regulations, and policies of getting a truck out of Ukraine. And then we had to follow all the rules and regulations and policies of shipping it overseas. And then we had to, all the customs and rules and regulations that we had to follow getting into the United States. And like I said, it took us 2 years to do it. So it was for an organization that doesn't do things like that, it was difficult, but we did manage to do it. I'll send you some pictures of it so that you can see it. It's a pretty cool vehicle. I mean, honestly, it belongs in a museum. And it's just and then of course there was a newspaper article that, you asked about provenance, right? There was a news story about it originally in the newspaper. In fact, I'm going to copy it and stick it in the link so you can see.
Yeah.
That's the link when the Zelensky truck, I just sent it to you, was sold.
Yeah.
But what it looks like now is a little different than what it looked like then. I'm going to send you some pictures of that as well, so you can get it.
We'll post it in addition to this audio. This is great. How many ambulances did you expect to send to Ukraine for this? Are there any ambulances right now that have managed to survive for a prolonged period of time there?
All right, so those are two different questions, but basically, I mean, I'd love to be able to sell or if you will, get a donation for $100,000 at least. I've been told by auction houses here in the United States it's worth at least that, if not a lot more. The person who we'd give it to for a donation obviously is going to know that money is being used for ambulances. So we hope they're not just, buying the truck, if you will, to use lack of a better term, or But they're donating to our cause because they want us to buy ambulances possible. And as I mentioned, each ambulance costs about 10 grand. So we're doing the best we can. And you know, I'm hopeful that we can buy as many as possible.
Excellent. And
in fact, I just got it registered in the United States. I don't know if you have the pictures yet. You can see the bullet holes in it.
oh yeah, that are bullet holes, and there's some field fixes being done to this as well, as I see here.
Yeah, I mean it was quite the truck. But I think that at the end of the day, we're just going to try to get what we can.
The Russians themselves, they speak about how they lack a lot of stuff of themselves, which doesn't make it way easier. Just basically steal everything. That's somewhat scary, you know.
Is very.
What's the most difficult situation that you've been involved in this project, by the way? What's the hardest part of this?
So the hardest part is realizing the suffering that is being inflicted upon Ukraine by what I think is an evil dictator, an authoritarian, and who doesn't care about the well-being, the people of Ukraine, who has a warped sense of what Ukraine is, and his reality is just so far. It's just bizarre. There's no other way to say what Putin is thinking in terms of any student of history recognizes Ukraine's rich culture. Yet they are not interested in rich culture. They're interested in domination. They're interested in reclaiming the Soviet Union. They're interested in building an empire. They're not interested in freedom, rights, liberty, justice. And that's the most difficult part. As I mentioned earlier, when we were in Mykolaiv during the very first delivery, we were at this undisclosed location, and I was meeting with this the 38th Coast Artillery, which I found was really telling because my grandfather was in the Coast Artillery in the First World War. So I'm sure there's some message there that my grandfather's sending to me. But the bottom line is that while we were at this location, we saw shells going like arbitrarily into Mykolaiv, and right into the city. And then another shell fell short into like a little village, and it hit a house. I mean, it wasn't a military complex. They shot someone's house, and I cannot imagine what it must mean to live on a daily basis in Ukraine. Just having experienced it only for a few days, we stayed one night there, and they got very, very close with the shelling to where we were, because the house where we were absolutely shook like it was going to fall down, and it was probably the scariest time in my life that I can remember. And of course, just ongoing from that point on, we've been to so many different places. In fact, Prokrovsk, where we would really stay midway between the time we were delivering the ambulances to places like Bakhmut or even New York. Have you heard of? There's a small village called New York.
New York, yeah.
I mean, I've been there. I was there before, the Russians took that part of Ukraine, and it's on the front lines. But I was there and experiencing firsthand what it meant to be under shelling. But the hotel we stayed at Prokrovsk was completely wiped out, and many people lost their lives. And I went back and saw that hotel while it was still. While I was still able to go to Prokrovsk, and I saw the destruction on the fourth floor where our team usually stays. And had we been there that day, we would have been all killed. It just it's hard to put into words the suffering that is going on a daily basis in Ukraine. But we try to do what we can. As I mentioned earlier, there's never going to be enough resource to meet the need. I'm never going to be able to give all the ambulances I'd like to give to Ukraine. But we're doing the best we can on a daily basis to try and help Ukraine as much as we possibly can. And fortunately, I've got really great people who've helped us along the way deliver these ambulances. We're going to have on this next mission about 30 volunteers who will help us deliver those 20 ambulances. And one of the other reasons I give or use volunteers is because when they go back to the United States, they become ambassadors for Ukraine. They've seen firsthand the atrocities that took place in Bucha.
Oh yeah, I was there as well. Sadly, I was among the first journalists to go there and witness that myself. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Sadly.
Yeah, I've gotten to know Mayor Fedoruk quite well, and under the circumstances, he did the best he can. He's got a story that's fairly amazing. I don't know how much you know about his personal story during the occupation, but we've been to Bucha. We've talked to a number of people there. We're trying to set up a prosthetics clinic there as well. But like I said, there'll never be enough resources to meet the need, but we're going to do the best we can. And we've had really good people helping us along the way.
Yeah, I was there with Mr. That was Gerashenko. Anton Gerashenko took us there. He organized the trip in the beginning, so I don't know much about the mayor of Bucha himself. I was there when all the first. That was I think back in April 2022, yeah, when the war started out, like or 2023 when they retreated, like in the early days, and well, if you can, please do tell about the mayor, because that's something that I'm not informed that much about myself.
So
I
got to meet the mayor in 22. Actually, we brought him to the United States to tell his story twice. Where he met members of Congress. He went up to the Hill to talk about what was going on in Ukraine. He went to New York City, met with officials, met with the governor of New York State. Ukraine Focus facilitated a sister city relationship between Albany and Bucha. We've done some significant work on schools in Bucha. We actually helped raise about $750,000 for reconstruction of some of the schools in Ukraine, or in Bucha rather. And so when the Russians occupied, well, let me backtrack a little bit too on this, because this is really important for your folks to understand, the people listening to this. I have had the unfortunate circumstance to visit places that were liberated by Ukraine from the Russians, both in Kharkiv, Kherson, and near Bakhmut. In fact, I've written about it. But one of the first things that they do when they occupy an area is they destroy the schools. They go in, and just like Bucha, they went into the school and they broke every window. They destroyed what they couldn't steal, they broke. I was there at the very beginning to see this school. There was other schools that I had visited. They basically make it, so that it's unusable. But that's not where they stop. They not only destroy the schools, they destroy the administrative buildings, they destroy the cultural centers, and then they go after the elected leaders. And to hear the story that the mayor is told, it's really an amazing story, where when the Russians first entered Bucha, they obviously wanted to get the leader of the city, so they tried to hunt him down, and he basically went from house to house almost every night, hiding at a different constituent's place in order to avoid getting caught. And while he's doing that, he's basically running the city in the best way he possibly can. And meanwhile, the Russians are, going into his house. They burned his house down. They left a flak jacket on his front door as a message to, you better have this on when we catch you, because we're going to try to kill you. And, he was able to avoid capture and basically come back afterward and help, fix the city, to rehabilitate the city, if you will. And he's done an amazing job in the last 3.5 years. But there isn't a day that doesn't go by that the people in Bucha are continually scared about this happening again, as are all of the other cities and towns throughout all of Ukraine that have either been occupied or have been liberated, or being occupied currently. So it's really so tragic what's going on in Ukraine. And I really get concerned that human beings aren't learning from the past. I mean, we should be looking not just at what happened during World War II, but look at what happened during World War I, and even before that. You have a Russian. I mean, the reason my grandfather left Moldova was because of the Russian pogroms that occurred in that period of time. I mean, the bottom line is that we're not learning from history. We're repeating the mistakes that we've done in the past. And I feel personally that we should have been much more heavily engaged in Ukraine. In fact, I think that during the Biden administration, had he leaned much more heavily in, this war would be over by now. But he didn't. He had what I think was an upfront strategy in the first 30 to 60 days that worked. But beyond that, I think that he did not make the right decisions that would have ended the war quickly.
Yeah, that is a thing that I've heard because I speak with people in the front lines as well, and they told me that right now the fact that there was this Ukraine is now striking these oil refineries, and that Biden administration was very angry about that. And I really don't know exactly why, but apparently they were not happy about Ukraine striking those things, although that is a great help to the war effort.
So I am also a fellow at the German Marshall Fund. I don't know if you've ever heard of the German Marshall Fund.
I haven't though, sadly. So you can explain that too. Possible.
It's a think tank, and I will actually send you a link to it. But I've written a number of articles for GMF. Going back to 22 and 23, where I basically said, give everything that you can to Ukraine because they need it now, not later. In fact, I'm looking at some of the articles now. I'll send you a link. But basically, if you look back at some of the things that I wrote when the war started, you'll see that, for instance, in April of 22, I wrote, U.S. and Europe must stop tolerating crimes against humanity. In 23, Ukraine needs more. And these are the things that we've been talking about. For instance, just closing the skies, which means basically closing the airspace over Ukraine, would have saved the infrastructure, would have saved lives, and probably, in my estimation, would have ended the war. But if the United States had given a lot more up front during the Biden administration's first few months, I think the war would be over. I mean, when the Russians were on the heel, that's when you lean in. You don't just say, okay, the Russians are leaving the parts near Kyiv to regroup and then send all their troops out to the east and basically create a new strategy, which is what they did. I think what we should have done was recognized a weakness and exploited that to end the war, but we didn't. So I mean, again, you can't go back in time. We have to look forward. But again, we're doing whatever we possibly can, and I'm trying very hard. This isn't political, by the way. I just want you to be, I don't agree with some of the things that Donald Trump is doing either. Obviously, cutting off Ukraine is not the solution either. We need to look at Ukraine as a history lesson, but we also have to look at what's going on in Eastern Europe previous to Ukraine, whether that's in Georgia, whether that's in Moldova. I mean, in Transnistria, they never left, right? We know that they've occupied part of Moldova since before the wall fell, and they've never left. So what does that tell you in terms of military use by the Russian government? And on top of everything else, you have the war of disinformation that Putin has been fighting in all countries in Eastern Europe, and whether it's in Serbia or Montenegro. I mean, if it's in EU countries like Hungary and Poland, he's utilizing whatever information warfare tactics he can to change and create disinformation and disharmony amongst the allies for his own ends.
Yeah, that's the thing that I've been trying to fight on this show. And especially, I'm more focused on their own internal propaganda because I read everything that these, vatniks, as I call them, say. Their own propaganda materials that are not the ones that Solovyov does or official propaganda, but they're lesser channels, and they're not happy about the situation, and they are also feeling the pressure. So I think that, like you said, what I find the hardest is that a lot of people think that this whole war situation, that's somehow, a lot of people tend to think that somehow helping Ukraine is pointless because they're going to lose anyway, and they try to combat this area as well because it seems silly. Because Ukrainians are motivated and very strong, and they're focusing on this, and they're not slacking off, as a lot of people sadly tend to think.
And by the way, I also would just go back and say that the Trump administration, during when I was working for President Trump in the first administration, they were extremely supportive of our efforts to counter malign Kremlin influence, and the strategy that we developed at USAID actually led, in many ways, the overall government response. And as you think about, and I'm happy to send you that strategy, but part of that strategy was energy and infrastructure. And when the war started, they were able to, if you will, in very lay terms, the switch to create a connection between the networks of Ukraine to the Western network to continue to keep the electricity on. And that is in large part, and most part, if you will, to the work that USAID did under the Trump administration, under my leadership at USAID, to make sure that the technical know-how to do that was in place when it needed to be, and it was. There are other programs that we supported at fighting, pushing back on disinformation and supporting democracy that were very valuable. And obviously there was a lot of disinformation coming from Russia when the war first started. If you probably recall, Russia was saying, "Oh, stay inside. We're here to save you. We're here to help you. You're going to have a better life." And the fact of the matter is they were coming in and they were raping and pillaging and they were killing and they were stealing toilets and refrigerators. I've interviewed numerous people whose apartments they broke into, and they basically wrote graffiti on the wall and stole everything that person owned, and that wasn't nailed down.
Oh yeah, I remember this. This is one of my heaviest things. It was nearby Bucha in one of those other villages around there, and the scariest part was that I saw how they were like leaving mines inside the place where they were staying, and I didn't understand exactly what was going on back then, because it seemed somewhat silly what they were doing, but because those mines were really poorly placed and made kind of in a very obvious way, and then one of the guys who was doing the demining just said, "Oh, those mines are not for you; those are for the children." And then it really hit me back then.
Well, and they were using what they call butterfly mines, and so.
Oh yeah.
And in fact, one of the things that when I was doing the assessment, I talked to this young mother who, in the dark of night with her 14-year-old son, crossed the river in Irpin to get on a bus to get out of Irpin, basically resettle in another location in Ukraine. But she was telling me how they had to run around these little butterfly mines, and what they do is they drop them from airplanes and they kind of float and spin down to the ground, and they look like toys. And in many cases, kids would pick these things up thinking that they're like some sort of toy when they're not. And they're not meant to kill you. They're meant to maim you, which is even worse, because what they basically do, they'll blow your arm off or they'll blow your foot off. And they create a resource crisis in terms of dealing with the medical crisis. And then they also disable the person without killing them. It's unimaginable.
Yeah, but this whole thing is really. I like to compare this in the sense that for us here in our parts of the world, this feels like all this war has been basically kind of like similar to in the feeling and how it's impacted all of us here, including myself up here in the Baltics, because we've been very helpful here. It really does feel like 9/11 just lasting for 4 years now, and it's pretty hot. It's going to leave scars for the whole region, I think, and it's very important that we help Ukraine as much as possible and get this over with as soon as possible, I think.
I would agree.
Well, I will definitely leave this, but about the Zelensky car, I'll of course leave the information about this out there. But if you could tell us one more time, it's in the United States. Are there any special rules or laws about who can apply for this and what can be done? That sort of thing. Is there?
Yeah. So anybody who's interested in the vehicle should let me know. I've sent you some pictures of it.
Yeah.
And our goal is to buy as many ambulances as we can. So we just haven't figured out what that looks like yet.
Mm-hmm.
And have them contact me directly through our website, or my email is brock@ukrainefocus.org.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send that to you. But if they're interested, they can reach out to me. I honestly believe it belongs in a museum. It's one of a kind. And I sent you a little bit of background that was put together by the person I bought it from, who when it served in the front lines.
Oh, okay, that's gonna be excellent. But yeah, in general, I'll definitely message you on, because I have a news episode coming in as well very soon. But we'll definitely have you back on the show to inform more about this whole event, because I find this very important. So that's going to be great. Hopefully, we can make sure that Ukraine gets all that it needs. But for now, I'm gonna have to end our conversation, because again, a lot of important stuff to talk about in the news episode. That's also upcoming. Pretty much, that's gonna probably air before this one, because we're gonna end this. But all in all, if you have any final last words about what you want to say to the audience of the Eastern Border, then please go ahead, because wow, I'll do my best to help you out in this case, because this sounds like an awesome thing that you're doing here.
Well, thank you very much. Like I said before, we appreciate your time. We know you're up against a lot of different issues, but we greatly appreciate it, and we're going to continue to do what we can as long as we possibly can to help Ukraine be free and continue to fight for democracy, liberty, and justice for all of us.
Wow, thank you for your work, and to everyone listening. Yeah, we're definitely going to have Brock back on the show in the future. I already know this, because there's a lot of details that we want to talk about this. It's just that I also have to deal with Russian disinformation a lot during this whole war. But yeah, thanks for being on the show, Brock, and I hope that you won't mind coming on again at some point in the future. But
No,
but for now, as I always say, до свидания, товарищи, and remember, happiness is mandatory.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.